Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I am beyond thrilled today to welcome Patrick Gomez to the podcast to talk about There's a Girl in My Soup, starring Peter Sellers and Goldie Hawn, released about 50 years ago, December of 1970. How are we doing, Patrick?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. It's always fun to get to discuss film and to discuss one that it's hard to believe that was 50 years ago, but I'm super excited to talk about it.
Yeah, isn't it crazy? Goldie Hawn is old enough that she has not one but two feature films released more than 50 years ago. We have, 50 years ago we have There's a Girl in My Soup, and then we also have Cactus Flower, her first movie from 1969. Have you seen her first film that came out in the late 60s?
I've seen like clips of it, but I've never actually sat down and watched the whole thing.
It's really great. It's her debut, and she won the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress.
It's insane, and I know the BAFTAs also thought she was fantastic there. So it's kind of crazy to realize how long she's been around. And you may have planned on speaking about this later, but I also in preparing for this remembered that she had a country music album even at one point. Like she's just had so many lives. Like Goldie Hawn has lived more lives than I think like in my entire family.
Yeah, Goldie Hawn and Kurt Russell were making the rounds recently to promote the Christmas Chronicles 2. And I can't remember which one I watched. I watched like 5. Like I see Goldie Hawn on a new like YouTube clip, like a talk show. I just watch it. That's how I, live my life.
So I think that's a good life philosophy.
If I see something new with Goldie, I'm like, watch it. And yeah, both she and Kurt Russell had like albums in like the 70s, which is crazy.
Yeah, crazy. Hers was called Goldie. It was a country music album. I definitely checked out just a little bit of it. It was functional. Like I'll give it to her.
Is it available? Is it available like on iTunes? Like how do you listen to it?
I found it on
YouTube.
I found it on YouTube. Yeah, I mean it may be on iTunes, but I just looked on YouTube.
Well, maybe she'll have another one. Do it one more time, Goldie.
Right? I mean, at this point, go for it.
Yeah, so we'll definitely get to Goldie. We're going to talk about her a lot in this, but I wanted to start by talking about you. I wanted you, for our listeners who might not know, the work that you're doing, your amazing career that I've been following for many years. You started, I want to say, what was it, 6, 7, 8 years ago? You were working at People, or was it before that?
Yeah, it was almost exactly 10 years ago. Was
10 years. Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And it was, to be honest, I was in my mid-20s and I was working like 5 different jobs. I'd gotten basically a double major at USC in journalism and in theater, and
cool.
was kind of exploring both of those as a young 20-something in Los Angeles does, and was working a couple days a week at a marketing firm and a couple days a week at a restaurant and a couple days a week writing for 2 different entertainment websites. And an opportunity came about to possibly have a 3-month basically internship at People. And it was like I said, the commitment was only for 3 months, but I said like I have to take this chance and quit all of my other jobs except for I kept the restaurant 1 day a week. And for a year and a half I did that, kept that restaurant job 1 day a week, and as permalance is the term I liked to use, for a year and a half. And then I was very fortunate to go from permalance to permanent staff about a year and a half in, which was a little unheard of at the time. It had been 9 years before anyone else had done that.
Oh, wow.
Or since anyone else had done that. And I felt very lucky. A lot of that was timing. I mean, not to discredit my own skills and the benefits of having me around, but obviously if a position opened and I grabbed it. And 10 years later, I guess, at that point, 8 years later, I had a 2-year stint at Entertainment Weekly where I was the senior editor for their TV content, and now I'm the editor-in-chief of the A.V Club, which I could not be more happy about. It's a site that I grew up reading People magazine and Entertainment Weekly magazine, and obviously their online presences are huge now. But the A.V Club was a site that I've been visiting since college, and it's been a dream to be a part of that team as well now.
Yeah, that's amazing. You've worked for three companies that I've been familiar with since I want to say high school. I mean, People magazine every week, Entertainment Weekly. I want to say 1996. I would have been like 11. Was like the first year I started subscribing to Entertainment Weekly. So I've been, and I still to this day, even though it's monthly now, I still get it every month. And then the AV Club, yeah, I want to say I discovered that maybe in college. I loved My Year of Flops.
Yes.
Which was became a book. And so yeah, I go to AV Club all the time. And so what's your role at AV Club right now? It's editor in chief, right? So what kind of responsibilities does that entail?
Yeah, so it's a little bit of everything,
Mhm.
and we're a small, we're about, in terms of, we have a large group of freelancers that come in, and like My Year of Flops, we have columns that are written
Yeah.
by a lot of people that aren't technically on staff but have worked for us for a long time,
Hmm.
or written for us for a long time. I won't say worked for us. But as editor in chief, I run kind of our team of about 15 staffers,
Hmm.
and so get to really be involved across the board in terms of all different kinds of entertainment. And we have our weekly staff meetings in which people come in and say, I just watched this weekend and I really want to write about it. Something that's super timely,
Hmm.
ranging from that to every week our very diligent editorial coordinator and our web producer put together our list of like what's upcoming and what's having an anniversary. And so we're constantly looking at covering, breaking news obviously every day, but also like the pop culture of the moment. And then what can we look at that's, came out like 50 years ago or
Yeah, yeah. You know what? You know, it's a
15.
great idea. I don't know if anyone's come up with this yet, but looking at films that were released 50 years ago.
You know what?
That's a
Like
good topic.
I've never heard of that concept before. Somebody should do a podcast about that. Um, yeah. So it ranges from helping greenlight those ideas to fostering
Hmm.
those ideas and really developing them into something. And a big part of because for those that are unfamiliar with the AV Club, it started as the non-satirical section of The Onion.
Right.
So back
Okay.
when The Onion had its print edition, there would be a half page that at first that then grew to larger and larger, where they would have like a celebrity interview or a review of a current movie or TV show,
Hmm.
things that were not satirical, although still similar in tone of kind of being a little irreverent and a little coming at things a little sideways. And we've taken that and just it exploded once it got its own website, and now has been around, since the late 90s.
Yeah.
And we cover news and do features that include interviews and with talent both in front of and behind the camera. But the thing I'm most proud of is that in a time when most places are dwindling their numbers of critics, of arts critics, we are trying to grow ours. We're trying to
Oh, cool.
cover as many movies, as many TV shows,
Hmm.
as many albums, as many comics, as many podcasts, as many books, all of it.
Hmm.
If you can consume it as part of pop culture, we want to have an authoritative, critical voice on it. And the team over there just, the best thing is like, a lot of times you're like, oh, critics just love to hate on everything. And we certainly don't shy away from criticizing aspects
Hmm.
of things that we don't like.
Hmm.
But really, at the end of the day, like the group of people writing for the AV Club, they're just fans of pop culture, and I think that that's what has made the site successful for so many years, because it's a truthful and honest take on whatever they're talking about. But at the same time, it always comes from a place of reverence and respect and understanding the art that goes into making something.
Yeah, exactly. I've never understood the idea of wanting to be a film critic, having it be kind of your daily bread, and not actually enjoying the job. I mean, even if you don't like a movie, there should be, at least, as you say, some reverence for the craft or for the actors, for the director. Yeah, to just go into it and not really, oh, I'm just going to hate on everything. I don't understand that concept at all.
I think that there's definitely a world in which you get very disappointed when you see something that, because you have such respect for the art form, that like if you see something that you feel like just completely uh, didn't take it seriously, or
Hmm.
made horrible choices. I can understand the anger that may come through in your writing about like, I can't believe that somebody
Yeah.
paid millions of dollars to make
Yeah.
this when they could have made something like so much better.
It happens.
um it happens, it certainly happens, but hopefully that's far and few between. We also really try and focus on like, if we have nothing, like it's one thing to hate on something and have a point of view about it, but the other thing that I really push is like, if we just hated something but we feel like there's nothing to say about it other than the fact that it was bad, why write about it? Like, why even give it the space?
Yeah.
You know, so we really do, even when we are giving, you know, I'll say we gave oh, I can't remember if it was a D or even a D minus to The Prom, Ryan Murphy's adaptation of the Broadway
Okay.
musical. I wouldn't have given it that low. I didn't think it was like God's gift to musical movies, but
I just
wouldn't
watched it. Yeah.
I personally wouldn't have given it that low of a grade, but the person that reviewed it for us did. But they had commentary on like things that could have actually improved. You know, it wasn't like trying to review a movie that wasn't meant for critics to watch. You know, it's like, why would we review the Trolls movie?
Yeah.
You know, because that's not made for an adult to necessarily enjoy. And while there are, you know, a Pixar movie is an animated film that we might have a lot to say, we just try to shy away from like just like shitting on things.
Exactly. Yeah, I just watched The Prom, and I've been seeing so much hate on Twitter for that movie.
I was surprised.
It's not a great film, but it's fun.
Yeah.
It's fun. You know,
it's
like...
fun. I think also, like, I was very fortunate to get to see it on Broadway.
Okay.
Every year, my husband and I take a trip to New York. Almost every year.
Yeah, almost every year.
Yeah. Take a trip to New York, and we'll try and see like 5 shows in 4 days. Like we'll just like bam, 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 bam. And that was one of the shows we saw the previous year. And it was so funny. We walked out of it, and my husband was like, they're going to make that into a movie like next year. And I was like, well, it'll have to like run on Broadway, and then it'll tour. And then, because obviously they don't want to lose the revenue of the stage production by releasing a film too soon. But then it closed relatively soon after we saw it. And then all of a sudden Ryan Murphy was like, I'm doing a movie. And I was like, well, you were right. Yeah. And it's enjoyable, actually. Like, I think what's funny is you obviously go into it expecting Meryl Streep to be Meryl Streep in it, and she is. But I was very actually surprised how much I enjoyed, and not that I don't enjoy him. I know a lot of people love to hate on him, but I really enjoyed James Corden. I actually think he kind of walked away as like one of the more memorable parts of that movie. Of course, we can get into the fact that he's a straight man really playing up effeminate, which
gets into some weeds.
Although I will say, in this case, also having seen the Broadway production, like that's built into the character.
Okay.
So, you know, it's a little bit like talking with a lisp. You know what I mean? Like in this, the year of our Lord 2020, we look at that all a little oddly, being like, well, why couldn't you cast someone that was already like that? But at least this wasn't like he walked in there and was like, oh, it's a gay character, so I'm gonna play him with a swish and like the limp wrist and stuff like that. Like, that's actually written into the character as like there's lines commenting on it. So it was unavoidable that, like, yes, they could have cast a queer actor, but aside from that, he didn't like make choices that beyond that were offensive to me.
Yeah, exactly. I also wanted to ask you about, you know, I've seen you do some interviews with some major talent. Have like, who are some like major actors or directors that you have memories of interacting with, like throughout your last 10 years of working at People and Entertainment? And
yeah, I mean, I think I'm pretty sure I was the last person at People to get to interview Jerry Lewis.
Oh, cool. Wow. What was that for?
Oh God, I want to say there was like there either was a film that he had a very small part in.
Yeah.
Yes.
I want to say he had a film.
No, he played like an older father to like a oh God, it's like a Sarah Silverman type, I want to say, or something like that. Yes, and it was that project, and then I believe maybe it was like 6 months later that he he passed. But he was like you know, he had a very long and good life. And it was just, I mean, you know, it's interesting to speak to somebody that's been doing press since the days that doing press meant talking to like one person and that disseminated around the world kind of thing. You know, he certainly like wants things his way, and he was not rude by any means, but very much like, all right, let's get to the point. Ask me your questions. Let me give you your answers, and let's get out of here. Like it was work. You know what I mean? Like some celebrities you sit down with, or some directors you sit down with, and they genuinely want to have a conversation and actually treat this as though it's just sitting down for coffee. And then others are like, nope, like I'm contractually obligated to be here and answer your questions, and I would like to do that and go upstairs and take a nap, please. And that certainly was his mode. But again, it wasn't a rude sense. It was just like, okay, like I'm going to the DMV and here's my form kind of situation.
That's crazy. That's awesome. So my 3 favorites are Goldie Hawn, Meryl Streep, and Sandra Bullock. Have you interviewed any of them?
I've gotten to interview Sandra Bullock on like a red carpet situation. So
Oh,
for like
okay.
a minute and a half, and I'm sure there was like three other people like trying to ask questions at the same time. Goldie Hawn, I have not gotten to, sadly, and then
Yeah,
Meryl
because
Streep.
she hasn't done a lot of films, Goldie Hawn, so it's harder to
Yeah,
get access to Goldie Hawn. I feel like it's trickier than Meryl Streep and Sandra Bullock, who are making films every couple years or more than
yeah.
that.
I mean, I've gotten, because during my time at both People and EW, Goldie actually did do some press,
Okay.
and so I have colleagues that have gotten to like go to her house and do all that, and I've always
Oh,
been
fun.
very, very jealous. And then Meryl, there was like a junket for a film, so that was a little bit more of like it wasn't as hectic as a carpet, but also like wasn't intimate as in like sitting down for like coffee for an hour and a half to do
Yeah.
a giant feature or anything like that.
Yeah,
But
Meryl's definitely the most prolific of the three. Sandra Bullock has been quiet the last 7 years, right? She hasn't done as many
she did
films as
Bird
she used
Box,
to.
so that was like that's probably like the one like big thing that
Yeah,
she.
since Gravity, her one like giant kind of hit film was Bird Box on Netflix, and then Ocean's 8 did pretty well too.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Meryl Streep, I want to say, is in at least one film every year. Like she's
I
in a
mean,
lot.
it seems like every week at this point. Like she's
This
just
week she
like,
had two films.
I mean, it's insane. Yeah, it was so funny. My mom actually, preferred. She was wanting to go for the HBO one, and I was surprised. I thought the prom would be her Friday night viewing,
Yeah,
but
I watched Let Them All Talk Thursday night, and then the prom the night after, and it's still to this day. It's just wild. It's like does not seem like it's the same person, you know?
yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I will say, as I hadn't seen a lot of older Meryl Streep films, and so by the time that I was consuming Meryl Streep as a performer, she kind of had gotten to the point that she was always Meryl Streep,
Yeah.
because there was that middle ground area. There was that middle period of her career where she wasn't doing, like, it wasn't Silkwood, and it wasn't Sophie's Choice, uh,
Hmm.
and it wasn't where she was being like you said, like where she has two movies in a week that she's completely different characters. She
Yeah.
was always kind of just like what I imagined Meryl Streep to
Yeah.
be. Like that was kind of every role that she was doing for a little bit. And so in my head, as a young movie viewer, I was always like, well, Meryl Streep's always Meryl Streep. And then as I got into high school and stuff and started to watch some of her older work, I was just like, oh, like
Oh
this
yeah.
woman's incredible. And now, of course, like I'm a super fan like everyone
Yeah.
else.
And we'll get to Meryl, I think, a little bit later when we talk about our favorite Goldie Hawn movies. I don't know about you. But so let me,
Maybe.
yeah, maybe. So let's get into just like you've talked about, your career and all of these amazing jobs that you've taken on, and what about just movies themselves? Since you were a young kid, like what role is like movies themselves played in your life since you were young?
Yeah, it's really funny because I was thinking about this the other day, and my mom is the pop culture lover
Oh,
in my
cool.
family. My parents separated when I was like too young to remember,
Mm.
and had divorced by the time I was in grade school. Um, Both very big parts of my life,
Hmm.
and but my mom was always the one that like really knew, like, I grew up watching TV that I was far too young to watch, just because it was only me and her,
Mm.
and I was an only child. And so I watched Sisters with her every Saturday night on NBC, long before that was a show I probably should have been watching.
Yeah.
And movies, and would go to the movies, and she would just cover my eyes at certain parts, kind of thing. Like that was our experience, because it was cheaper to take me than to pay a babysitter. um and we certainly didn't have that money. And so my exposure to pop culture, in terms of knowing a lot of stuff that maybe people, my same age don't know, is strong because of my mom, who just
Hmm.
loved all of it. And we would go over. I have distinct memories of being like 5 years old and going over to watch, like, do a big Oscar party with my mom that her friend would throw every year, and just falling in love with award shows because of that, and loving all that. And so that really set me on my path to People and
Yeah.
EW and AV Club,
Hmm.
for sure. But because my dad, because he lived in Austin, and we lived in Houston, and he would drive, diligently every other weekend, was his weekend, and he would come down, and drive, and we would not necessarily, he would usually, we wouldn't always have like a hotel room or something like that. And even if you did, it's like a tiny little hotel room. So, my childhood spent with him was like either in bookstores, so either at a Borders bookstores at the Meyerland Plaza, or the movies, because Houston was so hot. You couldn't
Oh
really go to
yeah.
a park, couldn't
Mhm.
really like you couldn't do a lot of stuff that was outside.
Air
So when we
conditioning.
exactly, when we didn't have a place to go, we would go, and like, it's years past. I'm hoping the statute of limitations is well past, but we would go and just like movie hop and watch like 3 movies in a day on one ticket.
Who didn't?
Yeah, right. So even though my dad wasn't necessarily a cinephile or a huge pop culture lover, like
Mhm.
my experience with movies actually really stems from both parents, in very different ways.
That's so interesting. Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the Oscars, because I got into the Oscars when I was really young. I want to say 9, 10 years old. And when you get to the Oscar ceremony, you're like, oh, I have to see all these movies, right? To really make it worth it. So even at a young age, when I was, even before I was a teenager, I would like try to seek out even those R-rated films. like, Mom, Dad, can I go see Secrets and Lies? And they'd be like, what? Yeah. So there was a lot of that going on when I was a kid. And I think like the Oscar ceremony actually played a large role in my interest in the film world too.
I remember like not really being so young that I didn't really understand time zones, and knowing how late it was in the central, like how late it was in Houston when the show was over, and they'd always have like, and now everyone's heading to the after parties, and I would be like, it's late. What are these people doing? And now I live in LA, and I'm like, oh, it's 8 o'clock. It's like time for dinner. Of course they're
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
go to a dinner party.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so the podcast, kind of the thesis is looking at films from 50 years ago and kind of seeing what has changed and what has maybe stayed the same in certain respects. I'm curious to know, like, what films of the 1970s do you have an interest in or that you enjoy? This is a decade before either of us was born, right? So we had to discover these movies much later on. When you think of films of the 70s, which ones kind of come to mind?
Well, I mean, when you think of the 70s, I think, there's obviously Jaws and Star Wars and
Yeah.
Superman, the original Superman.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of those movies. I
Those
actually,
are the three films that really kickstarted the blockbuster mentality, right? Those are the
yeah, I
three.
mean, yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I actually just recently watched all of right. Well, maybe not recently. At the start of the pandemic, which seems like both yesterday and
Yeah.
6 years ago,
6 years ago.
watched all the Mad Max films, for
Okay.
the
Yep.
first time.
Hmm.
I actually hadn't even seen the most recent one. So I think, the while I'm not positive it's like the best movie, that first Mad Max film, just like,
Hmm.
you see the impressions of what that kind of brought,
Yeah.
to,
1979. Hmm.
yeah, to today. And a lot of the ones that I think that when you first think about the 70s, at least for me, I think of the late 70s, and you're like, it's kind of cheating because they're basically 80s movies.
Well,
But yeah, I mean, love Mad Max. I also really love Smokey and the Bandit. I think that movie is just really fun, and their chemistry together is just fantastic. I think you look at the Chinese Boxer as like one of the first
mm,
films that really put the kung fu movie on
okay.
American
Hmm.
audience's radar, and that really kind of was part of the uh, I think the late 60s into the 70s is when you started getting those like action films that we
Hmm.
really started talking about and seeing in a major way. I think, I mean, Grease is just a good time. That's a late 70s
Yeah.
option. American Graffiti, I think, has its footprint over everything. Chinatown is another one. The 70s were a really interesting time because it was definitely a transition period
Absolutely.
where,
Hmm.
I mean, I think you could maybe say that about most decades, but
Hmm.
it certainly was a transition period of going from the everything is shot on a lot or
Hmm.
a
Everything's on
studio.
sticks.
Yeah, exactly. Like
you know.
you go from everything being super glossy and manicured
Yep.
to filming on the actual live streets, and getting those like taxi driver moments and all that kind of stuff where um, there's a grittiness to the 70s, that I think honestly we also went away from starting in the 80s too. It was a unique period
Hmm.
for that kind of image. Godfather, like that. I think of as well. Just thinking of other 70s movies I haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah, I guess in some ways the first real like blockbuster is The Godfather, which came out in early 72. So I will be getting to
Yeah.
that. I will be getting to that sooner than later on that one. That's going to be an interesting conversation. I don't know how you talk about The Godfather in like less than 2.5 hours. Like, there's so much to talk about with that movie.
There's a lot to talk about there.
Yeah. But we don't have to talk 2.5 hours about There's a Girl in My Soup, which is our film for today, which ran a very brief 90 minutes, and it's mainly just two actors in this film. I mean, we have some supporting players, who, I mean, I guess the ex-boyfriend has a kind of a significant role in this, but it's mainly a two-person movie.
Think at first.
What'd you say?
More significant than you think at first.
That's true. Yeah, he comes to play, and I try not to give away the very, very end, right? So like the last 5 to 10 minutes, let's try not to just tell the listener everything, because if they might want to check out the movie, I don't want to tell them exactly how it ends, but we're going to touch on it a little bit, because the ending of this film is kind of strange. But to start, I want to just give a brief summary for those listeners who might not know what this movie's all about. So again, it came out in 1970. This was Goldie Hawn's second feature film after Cactus Flower, which was her debut. And Peter Sellers plays a rich television show host named Robert Danvers, who obsesses over younger women. At one point, getting in bed with a woman who's just about to get married to another man. So, not playing like the most likable leading man in this at the beginning. But then he meets 19-year-old Marion, played by Goldie Hawn. She's a smart and thoughtful kind of a hippie who gets through to him like few women have before. Kind of forces him to change his ways a little bit as the movie goes on. She's just broken up with her British rock musician boyfriend, Jimmy, and is looking for something new. And she's taken with Robert when he doesn't immediately try to have sex with her. They come to like each other. They start an affair. They travel together to the south of France, which is a lovely little piece of the movie. But soon Jimmy returns to Marion's life, and she has to decide if she wants to go back to him or stay with the older Robert. That's kind of like the gist of the movie. Am I leaving anything out there?
No, but I think just to make it even worse for the start, I think that young bride actually had already got. I think it was the reception that they had sex. So she was already married. It wasn't even right before.
Oh, they'd already had the ceremony?
Yeah, I think they'd already had the ceremony. So yeah, I have to say, like, the start of this film, like, he just seems like such a lech.
Oh my gosh, this is not a character we would see in like I feel like in a film today. Like at the beginning
he would only be that character for the first like 15 seconds. Like, yeah, first 2 scenes maybe. Or they call him, it's a term I actually had not heard used this way before, but a rotter is what somebody calls him in the film. And yeah, I mean, it just like it makes this podcast, so you can't necessarily see my face, but like he makes you like your nose crinkle up, like the way that he talks to women, and
awful.
And yeah, and it's also just like such a it's so interesting to see, like, now it's like every man that's going to take his shirt off in Hollywood is like got a ripped body, and this guy is like he's thin, but like there's no muscle definition anywhere in his entire body, and his entire back is like
there's one glorious shot of his hairy back that I'm like, he didn't get up that morning and say, well, maybe I'll go get a wax job or anything.
Or it's so interesting because you see that actually with the James Bond films too. Like Sean Connery's back was not without hair, and normally I would feel like if that was the case today and the actor didn't feel it necessary to manscape in any way, they would like shoot around it or like not really like obfuscate the back. And here it's just like, nope, like you said, there's like this one scene that is like just his back the whole time. And you're just like, oh, so we are just like full on embracing that. And like, I'm all for it. Like let's not pretend that everyone's bodies, it looks like a magazine cover, but at the same time, it's just like, that's an interesting choice.
Yeah. I mean, and this is Peter Sellers. It's not like super stud Sean Connery, Peter Sellers. I mean, this is the, Inspector Clouseau and, Dr. Strangelove. I mean, it would kind of be strange if he had like the 6-pack and just like a perfect,
100%. And honestly, part of the the role is that, you know, he's aging,
Yeah.
and you know, he's not wanting to accept the fact that he's older than he says he is.
Yeah, and he's not necessarily trying to look younger, right? I mean, his hair is kind of going gray, and he's just kind of accepting. He's just
Oh,
like,
there's that fantastic. I will say, like, for this is not like a fantastic film by any means, but
no.
there are some fantastic physical comedy moments.
Yeah.
You know, to what you were just speaking of Strange Love and Clouseau.
Yeah.
There are just some fantastic physical comedy moments, not just from him, but from many members of the cast, which are so great. And there's the moment where his hair is coming out, and
Yeah.
I don't even want to ruin it for anyone that wants to go, but it's just
Yeah.
like, it's a fantastic little small moment.
Yeah. All right. So I have a few pieces of trivia about the movie I wanted to share, and then you can chime in with anything you want during this part before I ask you what you thought of the movie. And doing my research, funny, when I was taking notes on the movie, I was like, this kind of feels like a play. And a lot of the films I've looked at for 1970 for the podcast so far have been based on plays. I want to say this is the fourth or the fifth one. So there's a lot
Was
in this
19
period of time. There's a lot
that
of
was
adaptations from stage.
was 1970 the original Boys in the Band as
Yes,
well?
Boys in the Band came out in March of 1970. Yeah.
Yeah, so obviously that was a play as well. So yeah, big year for plays and film.
Yeah, The Great White Hope, which became a film with James Earl Jones, that was a play. I Never Sang for My Father, starring Gene Hackman. I mean, there's a lot, and some of these plays aren't super popular. It's not like they, you know, took the world by storm and, oh, of course we have to make a film out of this. Some of them like just ran for a year, you know, did okay, and then they make a film. It's like, okay, I guess this is the time we see that a lot. I feel like now, you know, it's got to be
Now it's
pretty
YA
big.
novels. Now it's
Yeah.
YA novels.
YA novels, exactly. So this film was based on the long-running stage play by Terrence Frisbee, who also wrote the screenplay. The play ran for 6.5 years in the West End, from 1966 to 1973, breaking records to become, at that time, London's longest-running comedy on stage. This was the only produced feature film written by Frisbee, who passed away earlier this year at the age of 87. It was his only screenplay that became a film. Kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's super interesting, and I think this is a film where the sums are greater than the whole, I think.
Yeah.
And I think the script is really interesting, is the word maybe I'll use there.
Yeah.
It introduces a lot of ideas. I think it explores different types of relationships and marriages, and discusses sexual activities in a really progressive way. Like there's a lot of stuff there that's super interesting. So you know, I would have been intrigued to see what else he could have contributed to film.
Yeah, I'm assuming that maybe his passion was the stage, right? I mean, if that's kind of what he was up to, maybe he, you know, maybe this production didn't go the way he wanted or something. But yeah, this was his only screenplay, at least produced for a film. And then the movie was directed by Roy Bolting, a figure I had not heard of before. He directed films between 1939 and 1979, made over 30 films. I never heard of any of them. I looked them up on IMDb. Like, usually, even if it's like, you know, if you've made 30 films as a director over 40 years, even if it's like the 30s, 40s, like usually I've heard of a couple, and I'm like going down the list. I'm like, I don't know. He did one in 1968 called Twisted Nerve that I'm like vaguely familiar with, but that's
I also think that's a great title, so that could also be why it's
a great title. So the film rights were bought in 1967. Goldie Hawn signed on in 1969. So I'm assuming maybe like right after filming Cactus Flower. The filming didn't take place in England and France until early 1970. The reason Goldie Hawn did not accept her Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress for Cactus Flower was she was in England filming this movie. That's why she wasn't there at the ceremony. Yeah. Did you know that she wasn't there to pick up her Oscar?
I knew she wasn't there, but I guess I didn't think about the timeline of this. Could have been the reason. Wow.
She was shooting this film, and I guess like the production kept getting pushed back, right, all throughout 1969, and then it got pushed to early 1970. And so she was overseas filming, and she was like, well, she didn't think she was going to win, right? So she's like, well, I'm not going to go all the way back to LA and go to the ceremony. I'm not going to win.
And it's so funny to imagine in our day and age that a publicist would not have been like dragging their young ingenue talent kicking and screaming to be
Can
like,
you imagine? Yeah.
will be at that
Yeah.
ceremony, you will be on that red carpet, you will like just wow audiences and introduce yourself to the world. But
Do
you
you
know what,
do you know
she did just
Oscar? Do you
fine.
know Oscar history? Like in 1970, was there a huge Oscar red carpet in 1970? Like, were
No, so
people being interviewed on the red carpet?
they really didn't, it didn't really exist until the mid 80s.
Okay.
In fact, it was the year I'm gonna forget exactly what year it was, but it was the year Rob Lowe did that duet
Did
with
Snow White?
Yes, it was that year.
Like 87,
Because
88, somewhere around there.
somewhere around there. And it was the producer. He thought it should be a spectacle, and so he really gave us the first red carpet in the way that there had always been a red carpet, and press were given opportunities, or I mean not always, but for a long time there had been. But it would be a situation that would last like 10 minutes. Like everyone would kind of show up 10 minutes before the show starts. They'd walk down, you'd kind of yell a question, they'd snap a photo, and they'd walk right in.
Yeah.
This was the first year that it was turned into an event that kind of had that like pre-show element to it, where they were kind of showing people walking down it and that kind of stuff. So yeah, that the way we know the red carpet to be today was like the mid to late 80s.
Yeah, you're right. The shift came around then, because if you look at old clips on YouTube of like even Golden Globes, right? Golden Globes, Oscars from the 70s, early 80s, they will like they will say the nominees and one of them is there.
Like the People's Choice Awards.
Yeah. So, and then it's, you know, really awkward when the one person's there and then that person doesn't win. They're like, oh well, thanks a lot. Yeah, I want to say there was this huge shift. Like Meryl Streep was nominated for a Golden Globe like every year of the 80s. She's never there, you know, even if she won. Like maybe a couple she went to, but then like all of a sudden in the 90s and 2000, then she's there every time. Like they're all there now. Like it's you know, only a Joe Pesci doesn't show up to the Oscars, right? Joe Pesci, I'm good.
He couldn't see through the crowd anyway, so like that's probably why he stays home. He's like, you know what, I get lost on the red carpet, never find my way.
That was wild. And I realized, I was like, wow, I mean, I'm so used to every nominee being there. When Joe Pesci blew off all of them for The Irishman, I was like, okay, very 70s of you, Joe.
Yeah.
So that, I thought that was really interesting about Goldie Hawn and not being able to pick up her Oscar. She would be nominated one more time. Do you know the other film she was nominated for, Goldie Hawn, for an Oscar?
I feel like I'm on the weakest link right now, and I'm just like, I know the answer, it's on the tip of my tongue, but because you asked me, I'm gonna totally forget. So you're gonna have to tell me.
Private Benjamin.
Yes.
From 1980, okay. She got a Best Actress nomination for that, but her only win was for Cactus Flower. So I feel like that would be kind of hard. Like you miss your one opportunity, and I mean, who knows? She's still acting. Maybe she'll get another nom in the years to come. But for her to miss out right on that one night where she won, it's got to be a little difficult for her. 50 years on, it's like I should have been there.
I think she's doing just fine.
She's doing okay. I think she's fine. I think she got over it. Goldie Hawn, according to IMDb, later described Peter Sellers as strange.
I think that's fair.
That was her. So that was her word.
He's so great at. Yeah, I mean, but that really is. I mean, he's almost like the only person you could envision playing this part, but also like the last person, like if I was left to my own devices, like would have cast in the role. Like he makes it his, and he makes it be that he's the only person that could play this role the way he does. But I also could have seen them going in a very, very different direction.
Oh, absolutely. And this was his last like semi-successful film for a long time. Like it took him going back to Pink Panther. He did 3 back-to-back with Blake Edwards in the mid-70s that, you know, kind of got him back, on the A-list again. And then, of course, Being There, a second to last film from 79 is such a great movie. Mm-hmm. We don't talk about his last film from 1980, but his second to last Being There is so fantastic. Couple other things. The film was the 7th most popular movie at the box office in England in 1970. And when the film was shown in Australian cinemas, the movie had all of its nudity eliminated to obtain the classification rating of SOA, suitable only for adults. Because Goldie Hawn gets naked in this movie. I did not see that coming. Right?
Well, it's so interesting because when she does, they do a really great job of like blocking certain body parts with furniture and that kind of stuff.
And the camera movement.
Yeah, the camera movement, all of that. And then all of a sudden, it's like in that same shot, they're like, oh, no, but here's also everything. And you're just like, oh, I thought we weren't doing that, but I guess we are. And like, sure, why not?
I would like to know the meeting they had about that, because there is absolutely no reason for her to be naked in that shot. Did you feel the same way?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's what I thought was really interesting, and maybe perhaps was the justification, or for me kind of justifies it a little bit, is that if it was a 60, if it was the movie that it was trying to kind of subvert, it would have been that, like, oh, you almost saw it, oh, you almost saw it again, and she's being very demure. But I think one of the things that's so incredible and empowering about her character is that she is so sexually liberated that, like, she wouldn't have cared that anyone saw her naked. So I think that could have been the justification, because I do think, like, had Doris Day been playing this part, it would have been all like, oh, like, you almost saw me naked, how could that be possible, and like, oh my goodness, I'm so ashamed, and you know, I'm blushing, and she's just like walking around and she's like, whatever, I'm naked, like
Doris Day would have had the bed sheet around her as she got
exactly the bed sheet around her, exactly, all the way up to her neck, and it was like, she would have found a safety pin and somehow fashioned it into a gown by the 10th minute she was in it.
Yeah, but here's the deal: she has that shot where she's naked, but then Peter Sellers is naked later in the movie in the ocean, in the water, right? Yeah, we don't see him. So why not show him?
They showed enough of his back earlier, I guess.
The director was like, you know what? No thanks. We'll keep it above the neck up.
Above the list, yes.
And the last thing, I think you mentioned it earlier, Goldie Hawn received a 1971 BAFTA Award nomination for Best Actress of the Year for both Cactus Flower and this film. So I guess Cactus Flower came out in 1970 in the UK, was what I'm assuming. That's why she got nomination for both films.
Yeah, and BAFTA kind of can do that, where they decide to honor a body of work for that year, and not necessarily one particular performance. So that was really cool.
Does BAFTA still do that today? Will they like nominate someone for two movies?
I'm 95% sure that I've seen that happen, because they do like a BAFTA tea event here in like the Hancock Park area of LA, and every year, and I've gotten the opportunity to go a couple times, and I want to say I remember some actors being mentioned, multiple titles being mentioned as part of their.
I'll have to look up Jessica Chastain 2011 when she was in like 8 movies. Maybe did she get a BAFTA award for all 8?
Yeah, you'd have to look
just
it up,
a list.
I would. Yeah, just a list. They like instead of her list of reasons she's nominated is as long as the entire list of nominees.
Yeah. Do you remember that year where like she wasn't? We didn't really know who Jessica Chastain was, and then it was like every 3 weeks it was like another Jessica Chastain movie, and then The Help was the one she got nominated for.
Yeah, I feel like Oscar Isaac actually had like a similar.
Yeah.
And obviously then they went on to be in a movie together.
Yeah. Great movie.
Great movie. But I think he kind of had a similar thing where it was just like, wait, what? This man just exploded everywhere.
Sometimes it works out that way. Edward Norton had that in 96. I mean, some actors, they just blow up on the scene like within a year. Like, you not only know who they are, you've seen 2 or 3 of their films, or nominated for an Academy Award. Some actors are lucky in that respect. Some others aren't so much. Right? They have to, like, it takes them a few years to get the right project. So that takes us to our, go ahead.
It's interesting because you think about the delay that you were mentioning of this film, and how that could have played differently, and maybe she wouldn't have gotten the BAFTA if she didn't have both in the same year in the UK. And so, it's always so interesting. I think about that with 2020 and how much has been delayed and moved, and how that's going to make all the awards so different. Like the Oscars are going to look 90%, 90% of the people nominated for the 2020 Oscars, I think, are going to be people that wouldn't even been part of the discussion had it been a normal year, just because of the way the world was and is. So
I've heard 2 different things from people I've talked to the last couple months. Some of them say, I've said, can we have a ceremony for 2020? Are there enough films? And some people have said, it won't be as competitive as your typical year. And then others are saying, you're not paying attention, Brian, there's a lot of great content out there that's going to be, you know, up for these awards. So are you kind of like in between, or like I haven't seen a whole lot of films this year that I'm like, oh my gosh, Oscar consideration, you know?
I'm hoping that it's going to be a situation where the films that get nominated for Oscars find a way to get into the homes of the like average viewer.
Okay.
Because we have we just got done with our best of the year lists at the AV Club, and we, you know, it was one of those things where I was like, man, like, are we gonna have stuff? And there were like heated conversations among the critics on what to include, and that just means there was enough, you know. And we do a list of I believe it's 20 or 25, but I mean it's a long list of films. It's not like a top 10. And we certainly had a ton that were worthwhile, and we, in fact, we even had a follow-up story about like about movies that we individual staffers thought deserved to be on the list that didn't end up on it. Like there was that many. So there certainly was stuff out there. I think it's been really interesting because you've either had to really seek out stuff or like not even known that it's available like on demand. There's been fantastic movies that, you know, premiered at Sundance in 2019 or something that were supposed to get big budget releases, you know, big screen releases that now are kind of just like available, not even on like Amazon and Netflix and stuff, but like that you could purchase for $2.99 or whatever through Comcast or whatever it is. And there certainly are those. You know, I would say if you haven't checked out First Cow, that's a fantastic option.
Are you posting? I want a place. Is AV Club gonna have a place? Like these are the 25, 30 films of 2020 you need to see before Oscar season or before like April.
Well, I would hope that our list of our best line up with the ones that you need to see for the
First
Oscars.
Cow, Nomadland with Frances McDormand. I've heard great things.
Yeah, there's a fantastic sci-fi film called The Vast of the Night. If you haven't checked out, is worthwhile. A personal favorite of mine that did not make our list, but that I was a champion of this year. John Leguizamo made his feature directorial debut with a film called Critical Thinking. Which I guess this was the year 2020 was the year of making chess exciting again. We had the Queen's Gambit series on Netflix. But this actually was a story about a inner city Miami high school chess team that went on to have a national title, and kind of their journey to that. And it sounds like a movie you've seen 10,000 times, but it's actually was very unexpected. It's not the word I would use, but it's surprising in ways that I was surprised about. So there certainly is a lot of great stuff out there. In terms of what was actually released in theaters, you obviously saw a lot more of like the Sonic the Hedgehogs, and you know, you saw the
our February release.
Exactly. You saw all that kind of stuff. So yeah, if you think about just those, it seems like a dire year for film. But
Invisible Man was great. Invisible Man was great.
I actually really enjoyed Harley Quinn.
That was fun.
Yeah. So I mean, once you start thinking about it and seeking out these best of lists, you know, hopefully you'll feel that there's enough to honor.
Is Christmas Chronicles 2 on the list?
It is not on the list, although we do have like a rule that it had to at least have intended to have a theatrical release, which is the same rule. But to be considered a film versus something that would have been covered on the television side of stuff.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so like Bad Education on HBO was a fantastic TV.
Oh, that was great.
Movie,
Yeah.
But we considered it a TV movie because of the way that it was released.
Okay. So that's interesting. So every film you have to kind of, was this designed for theatrical release, or was it designed for HBO or for Netflix?
Which is the same thinking the Academy actually is going through. So like, you know, it had to have either had or have been originally intended to have a theatrical release.
So it's okay if it was intended to be released on Netflix. That's okay as long as there was going to be a theatrical distribution of some kind, right? Like The Irishman. You know, that kind of movie.
Irishman, Roma, like how they
like Mank, right? Mank was going to have a select run, and then but primarily go to Netflix. Okay, gotcha.
Yes, yeah. So those would count, but something like I said, like Bad Education, wouldn't.
Okay, makes sense. All right, so There's a Girl in My Soup, which is like the craziest title, I think, of maybe any film I looked at for 1970. What were our main takeaways for this one, Patrick? What did you think of this film?
I think it's really interesting just looking at, because you think of, movies pre, I mean, even for now, I wanted to say pre, this past decade, but even for
Mhm.
today, this movie is actually quite progressive in the way that it deals with sex and sexuality and relationships. So it's very much the flower power
Mhm.
uh, kind of moment in history in which the sexual revolution was happening and that was being fully embraced. So in that aspect, it's like quite progressive and really unique. And the story is very unique. I know we don't want to give away endings, but it's very unexpected in many ways, and so in that it gets a lot of points in my book for being so unexpected. uh, and not having known a ton about the story before watching it, I continued to be like, oh, but this is when that's going to happen, and then it wouldn't, and then that convention wouldn't happen.
Mm.
um, and one of the things I will say, again, without giving away the ending, is that the major conflict for me, and I think this actually would have made me enjoy the film more, because I constantly am sitting trying to solve films, and it's something I try to turn my brain off of, but I'm like, oh, but now's when that's going to happen. Oh, but now this conflict is going to occur. And really, the major conflict of the film doesn't happen until I looked, because I was like, how much more time is left? And the major conflict really occurs with like 12 minutes left in the film.
Yeah. That's a good
So
point.
other
Yeah.
than that, it like really lets you just sit in the story and in this relationship of
Mhm.
these two people getting to know each other. And just, and the other major takeaway is that it's just like, it was so clear from minute one how much Goldie Hawn is a star,
Oh,
and
for sure.
the star personality. And after watching it and formulating my own ideas, I did go and kind of just was like, well, what was the critical reaction at the time? And I read one person said that her eyes were too expressive, over expressive, and I'm
Oh my
just
God.
like, no, that's like the magic of Goldie Hawn. Like, I don't know what's wrong with you. So those, I mean, in terms of
Yeah.
broad major takeaways, like I said, I'm impressed with how progressive it was. I thought it was very kept surprising me and being unexpected, and just really showcased what a she's a talented actress, but beyond that, just like what a star presence Goldie Hawn
Yeah, and
had.
for a second film too, that was my big takeaway of this, was just like, wow, this is your second film. And I mean, Peter Sellers had been acting for many, many years, had been in some, really classic films. I mentioned Dr. Strangelove and The Pink Panther, and Lolita, and so many great films. And she comes into this, her second movie. She's very young. When did she make this? Like 23, 24, like very
Yeah.
young. And she is, right on line with him, like all the way to the end. She is great in this. She looks stunning. This is her second film. The first film where she actually has like long hair, in Cactus Flower, it's like this pixie cut. So this is like the first film where she really looks like Goldie Hawn, and I thought she was absolutely radiant in this movie. Um, they had kind of a weird, effective chemistry. I don't know if you felt this about Peter Sellers and Goldie Hawn. Like when I started, I'm like, this is not going to work. He's too old. This is going to be weird. But there was kind of like, once they have, in the film itself, they start to have a connection with each other. It felt authentic. It didn't feel strange, as Goldie Hawn might describe it. Like it actually kind of like worked in some ways. And so
I
yeah,
think
that's
it's
why the ending is so, it kind of takes you back what happens. But
Yeah, yeah. I think the magic of that relationship is that at the core, they are both, even though they're not playing comedians in this film, I think
mhm.
they both are such comedians and physical comedians
Yes.
that there's some sort of like, there's that unspoken just meshing of souls between the two of
Mm.
them. And in it, it's always unclear exactly what Peter Sellers' character's age is, but he's 40-ish,
40-ish.
40-ish,
Yeah.
or as he would say, 34, 35.
34, 35.
34, 35 really quickly, but 40-ish is seemingly what his age is, and she says she's 19. And again, at first you're kind of like, ugh, ick.
Yeah.
But it
Especially
does,
now.
it grows, and particularly I think, like you said, uh, because it doesn't get romantic right away.
Yeah. Mhm.
I think that helps it, that it grows to that. But I also think it's it's really interesting to get back to like the progressiveness of it, how transactional Goldie Hawn's character finds sex, at least at first.
Yeah.
Being like, okay, well, you did this for me, so I guess it's like now time for me to give you a kiss, kind of thing. Like this is an exchange of that, which is both very sad, but then also very, I guess, liberating at the same time.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. But like I said, I also really enjoyed, we get Peter Sellers' character lives in a building with a doorman who has a wife of his own, and we get a look, at first I was like, why are we even bothering with these characters? But I actually, they maybe have like 3 really short scenes in the entire film where it's where it's their couple, and it's always them like sitting at breakfast or something. And I actually really enjoyed seeing that dynamic of marriage, seeing the dynamic of Peter Sellers plays a TV food critic who also cooks and does travel show kind of stuff on TV. So he's a celebrity, and so his agent or manager, I'm a little unclear exactly what he was, but his man behind the scenes, you get to see his marriage and his home life as well. And I thought that it was really interesting to see those different relationship dynamics all come into play. And I think that's a little bit of the play aspect that you were saying, that it seemed like a play before you knew it was based on a play.
Yeah, I mean, I should at this point just assume any film I'm looking at from from the early 70s based on a play, because it's happened so many times. But yeah, I mean, if there was something that I thought was lacking about the movie, as you say, like the major conflict happens in like the last 15 minutes. I felt like there could have been a little bit more urgency, more stakes. It's kind of this weird thing. Like I wanted it to be, the pacing to be a little bit faster, but I also, as I've said on other films on this podcast, like I like that we get to sit with the characters a little bit, right? Films of 1970 do not have some of the issues of films of now, where it's like you got to get to the next scene every 2 minutes, next scene. Like, films are allowed to breathe more in 1970 than they are today, and so I like that about it. But I also felt like there wasn't enough going on in the story itself to like really allow that long stretch. I mean, I think there's 2 scenes in this movie where there's in his apartment talking and talking and talking.
Yeah, which again is very, it's very, it's very play-like in that way. And part of me enjoys that, because I do think, one of my criticisms of Ryan Murphy's Boys in the Band remake was that he tried to make it cinematic, and that story, where he was cutting away during their like really dramatic, lengthy monologues that they go into in the second half of that play or film. He broke up that the tension that you have. I never got to see it on stage, but the tension from the original film, because they just have these close-up shots on them, and it's kind of just like them performing a monologue on camera. Ryan Murphy, the production that they put together, they chose to cut away to like flashbacks and that kind of stuff, and I felt like it was unnecessary. It broke the tension and like the emotional connection we're having with these people. And so I appreciate watching something that kind of does let it kind of just play out like a play. And I think that I think it's a little bit of conditioning for us now. It's the same thing we say about like every new generation's kids. It's like, oh, like they, the kids today are used to like Snapchat and TikTok, like 15-second clips. And if they're for us, it was the 15-minute episodes of Rugrats. Oh, they can't even sit through a full episode, they can only get half an episode. But for them now, it's gotten even shorter, and I think that so we're expecting those conventions to like keep the story going in a way that I go back to the word unexpected. I was expecting the normal romantic comedy tropes around every corner, and it continued to be like, no, we're not going to do that. We're just gonna like continue, like follow them to the beach. Like,
we're not there in 1970. We're not there yet. We're not at a whole lot of romantic comedy tropes yet. I watched the film.
Well, I think we'd shed the ones from the 1950s and 60s. And hadn't established the ones that would come into play.
We're like in this in between, right?
Yeah. Again, it's the 70s. Just like everyone, it was like Yahtzee. They just like, they shook up the can and just like let the dice fall as they may.
Yeah, 1968, we get the MPAA, and now we can show nudity. Now we can have language. And so, yeah, I feel like filmmakers from like 68 to 72-ish, like they're trying to kind of find their voices and see, like, what can I get away with? What can we do here? What can we do with this genre that you couldn't do 10 years ago? You know, so this is definitely one of those. I looked at another romantic comedy recently, The Owl and the Pussycat, starring Barbara Streisand and George Segal. And it's also a film that it's, you know, a meet cute and, you know, they fall in love, but it doesn't really have the tropes that you would see in a film made today. So so that's kind of exciting about this particular genre of that time. You go into especially a movie with Goldie Hawn and Peter Sellers, a comedy. You're thinking it's going to be a lot more pratfalls and, you know, like silly humor a la the
Which
Pink
they
Panther.
have. I mean, the scene where he's trying to get her luggage out of her ex-boyfriend's house is
yeah, we do.
hilarious.
We get moments like that, but we also get character and behavior, and it's not something you might expect from a movie with these two stars of the early 70s.
Yeah, if this was remade today, it would be just a physical comedy nightmare.
Exactly. One of my favorite shots of the movie is when he's holding Goldie Hawn in the elevator over like his shoulder, and there's like it's like a crowded elevator, and they're kind of looking at him like
he gets asked for an autograph. And,
yeah, that's right.
I also I think one of the moments that made me really believe them as a couple as well is you see in the early scenes of the film before he meets Goldie Hawn's character how Peter Sellers' character treats the press and his fans who ask him dumb questions. Like he constantly is coming up with really outlandish lies, and somebody else asks him, because they can't imagine that all he does is cook and travel, like that can't be his only job. And I think they were like, well, what else do you do? And I think he responds with something like, oh, didn't you know I am a doctor and I solely practice abortions, or something like that. Like he goes for the shock factor. And there's a scene when the press hounds both him and Goldie Hawn's characters, and she's also throwing out like a fake name and this and that. Like I think their temperaments were similar, and that's a reason that they worked.
Yeah, absolutely. I felt like the movie could have gone a little bit more into his job as the TV host. Like we see, there's that scene where isn't he like in bed with a woman and he's like watching himself on the TV. Yes. That was an interesting moment. That really told us a lot about his character, right?
Yeah. It was really interesting because it was so much of what his character was, but also we never really went into it. Like it was a defining characteristic of who he was. Yeah. But then we also like never really follow him to work. We never really like see him do that aspect of it.
Yeah, I was waiting for a portion of the movie to be he brings her to like the set, and she was going to be like behind the scenes watching him perform. Yeah, and something, you know, funny would happen. I thought that scene was coming, and it never did. So I thought that was kind of interesting.
Yeah, again, it never, when you thought it was going to turn right, it turns up. Like it's not even left. It's like you're like, oh, you went in a completely different direction.
Yeah. So what do you think like the theme of this movie was? Like I ask all my guests, like the theme, like what's like the intention behind this movie? What's the director, the storyteller trying to get? What ideas are they trying to get across through this film? Anything that came to mind, like beyond just what happens in the movie? Like what's kind of the theme, the arc of the characters, or anything that comes to mind?
I mean, I think what it means to be wanted is a thing that is kind of at the center of a lot of the conflicts, not just of the main characters, but even in those little scenes, like I mentioned, that we get with the other couples. Mm-hmm. I think that, so it explore, Goldie Hawn's character, you mentioned kind of the conflict that eventually arises is does she go with this ex, or does she go with Peter Sellers' character? And even there, it's like, and when she first meets Peter Sellers' character, a lot of it is coming from, am I wanted? Do I feel wanted? And does being wanted equate to being worthwhile? And I think that answer changes for multiple characters multiple times throughout the film. And I think that aspect of it seems really interesting. The film mixes really sad moments with very either romantic or funny moments, very, very well. Actually, the more we talk about this film, the more I'm like, oh, maybe I would give it a higher grade than I would have thought originally. So I think that those are major things that I walked away from the film with. But what about you?
Yeah, well, I felt like at the beginning I was like, this is Peter Sellers' film, but then towards the end, even though we end with an image on Peter Sellers, which I don't want to give away everything, but in some ways I felt like by the end it's almost like her film. Like she changes him in a way that makes kind of her part in this movie. It's absolutely important having them together all the way into the end, because even though what he says at the end suggests that maybe he didn't change that much, which I'd be curious to know if you think if that's the case. I feel like she's had she's given him a change in a way that no other woman has, because when the first 15 minutes, he's a certain kind of character. I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to spend 90 minutes with this guy. Like,
Yeah. Well,
I've had that experience on a couple films recently where I'm like, I don't know if I want to spend a whole movie with this person, but he really becomes softer as the movie comes along. And I felt like he really genuinely cared about her. So, I was trying to figure out, is this his film? Is it her film? It's really very, very close for me, and this idea of like,
it's interesting because I think we're used to the Pygmalion story, which there's a lot of that element here in different ways. At some points she's Eliza Doolittle, and at some points he's Eliza Doolittle. And I think they both again, it's hard to discuss without giving stuff away. I think they both change each other at different moments, but I think that ultimately he remains somewhat more changed than her. But it was really interesting when the film starts, and again, I knew the general swath of it being a romantic comedy, but it opens with the whole opening credits is just gorgeous shots of it's like the beginning of a Bond film, but where Goldie Hawn is the only thing you see. And it's
I
just
love
the
opening title cards of Goldie with the psychedelic early 70s song. It's fantastic.
Exactly. And I think, so going into it, I was like, oh wow, and especially knowing that this was so early on in her career, like it's like Goldie, 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 and then you don't meet, exactly. Then you don't meet Goldie until like 20 minutes in, 15, 20 minutes in.
Yeah.
And so that really threw me. And so I do think ultimately I think it's a film about her impact on him.
Okay.
And so in that way, I think it's his film.
Yeah. I mean,
but I think you can't walk away from this film. But she's what you walk away from this film remembering.
Yeah. Like the novelist in me is like, it starts and ends with him. It's kind of his arc and where we find it. Like it's his story in many ways. But the takeaway for me is her. Like she is really the light and like the soul of this movie. Without her, there's no movie. Without her, he's just this awful human being for 90 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
Why do we think this was called There's a Girl in My Soup? Any idea behind the title?
I mean, I know obviously he's a food critic and cook, and I think that there's a fly in my soup is obviously what it's playing on. And, and I think that it's something, to him, life would be, he'd go on slurping up soup left and right, soup being women. And I think that this is making him pause and be like, oh, there's something here that like is not usually here.
Let me take more than a day to explore this possibility.
Exactly. More than 10 minutes, 5 minutes. He tells that one woman 5 minutes because you can't at least make it 10.
That's right.
Yeah. So I guess the title I think is cute and creative, but also like gives you no sense of what the film is at all.
Yeah, it is a strange title. I mean, Cactus Flower, her first film, the same thing, right? Her third film with Warren Beatty called Dollars. That's a weird title. What was her first? The Sugarland Express, with directed by Steven Spielberg. That's a strange title for that movie. Like Shampoo. Like when does she get a good title? Private Benjamin, 1980. That's like her first real title.
For a woman named Goldie, I guess it makes sense.
Yeah, exactly. What do you think the director brought to this movie? I mean, not having seen any of his other films, it's kind of hard to like, try to find a trademark or anything. But anything that the director brought to this that you thought worked pretty well, or?
Well, kind of what we mentioned earlier in terms of just like letting those scenes play as just long scenes and staying on single shots for a long time, I thought was a choice that he didn't have to make. He could have really tried to make this into a cinematic experience in that way,
It's hard. Yeah, as you mentioned,
It's
it's hard in a play with a play, especially one that has a lot of dialogue in an apartment or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you make that cinematic?
Yeah, and I thought he did great. One of my favorite shots of the film, I loved the one you were speaking of earlier with her over his shoulder.
Yeah.
But the framing of the shot when she looks back at him, when there's a moment in the film where she's exiting the apartment and he calls out to her and she looks back. And just the framing of that shot I thought was fantastic because he's in the foreground and she's in the background, and you get two different doorways. I thought that was really interesting. I thought the shots of when they're in France were gorgeous, of Cannes and of some of the various locations that they were there. And then also just like, no, I mean, in part, part of this is hard to tell if it's the director or the cinematographer or at what point it came into the process, but like they also just like knew how to shoot those scenes, particularly the first ones in that apartment with Peter and Goldie, and just like capturing just her essence of just star power. It was incredible. And when Peter and Goldie are like inches away from each other's face, and yet they found ways to shoot that you could also see, you almost could get the over the shoulder shots even though they're so close, was really interesting.
No, I mean, for a film based on a play, there's some nice touches in this from the work of the cinematographer, from the director. I do think we spend so much time in the apartment that when we do open things up and they travel to the south of France, like those scenes really pop because we've been kind of inside for so long. It's a breath
of fresh air.
Yeah. And I was watching that wondering like, well, so what did they do on the stage for this part? Like maybe they just say, oh, we went to France.
Yeah.
and then, okay, for the film, the director's like, okay, we're actually going to go travel those shots of them, driving through the country and on the beach. It's like a real wine tasting. They go into that like wine cellar, which is really fun. So yeah, by that point in the movie, we've come to really kind of care about their relationship. So it earns those scenes. Like we've really come to enjoy them together. So once they're really like in love with each other, or at least I don't know, are they in love at some point? I mean, they really like each other.
I think she's 19 and doesn't really know what love is.
She's young, yeah.
And I think he genuinely comes to care for her, and that's more than he's done with any other woman, at least in the history that we've seen from her. And so, but also like I also love the school of thought of like what is love in general. I think love is I think this sounds very unromantic, but I ultimately feel like it's the most romantic. I think a lot of times you continue to choose love every day, and I think that's something that at different points in the film they choose about each other. So my short answer is yes, I think they loved each other. The longer answer is I think with any question about does someone love someone is much more complicated.
Yeah. Especially hard to capture in a film too.
Yes.
Even some of the best love stories ever made, it's like, when you have 2 hours, it's hard sometimes to capture that. Sometimes you need more than one film. One of my favorite movie trilogies. Have you seen the Before trilogy? Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, Before Midnight?
I've only seen the first one, so I
okay.
haven't seen
worth a look. I mean, that's a case of a storyline that takes place over 3 films where you really come to see love on screen in all of its facets. Anything else about the performances that we haven't touched on in this movie? Anything else you want to mention about Peter Sellers or Goldie Hawn in this particular film that you thought worked really well or was lacking in any way?
Yeah, again, I go back to like just the fact that they are such talented physical comedians, because that's not what this film is, and they found ways to integrate physical comedy moments into the story on both of their sides that I thought were so fantastic. And that's when you really saw the magic. And it's like, I'm glad they got to show this story because it wasn't just physical comedy 24/7, but I would love to have seen them in a film that was that, because I think they would have been fantastic. One of my other favorite Goldie Hawn films, which is not by no means a favorite of I think anyone else's that we can discuss in a minute, it lets her do that a lot more. So I would love to have. I'm glad they didn't do that to this film, but I would also have loved to see that film.
I can't get over how just confident she is in this movie. In her first film, Cactus Flower, there's a confidence, but she's playing a little bit more of like an eccentric, crazy side character in Cactus Flower. The 2 stars are really Walter Matthau and Ingrid Bergman in that movie. This is their first like real kind of starring role. And it's just amazing to me at that young of age I mean, her daughter Kate Hudson had that to a great extent in Almost Famous, one of her first films too. So it runs in that family. So, but like, yeah, I mean, she's just like such a great presence from the beginning of this film, and to have that very very early in your career is I feel like it's kind of rare. A lot of actors, major talents, they need to kind of it takes a few films to really find their voice, and you know, that kind of presence that comes through. Goldie Hawn had it very early on, and she shows it here.
Yeah, the confidence there is, I think confidence is the word, 100%.
Yeah. So my last question about the movie, which we've touched on a little bit, the last question I ask of every film is, you know, looking at this through a 2020 lens, you know, any aspects of this movie, I mean, I think we can agree on the opening 10 minutes, 50 minutes, are dated. And if they were to remake this today in 2020, 2021, what would change about it? How would it be different? What would they do to the story now?
I think so. I don't think it gives anything away to say at a certain point the press starts to think that they are more involved than they are. That perhaps there's been a
Yeah.
secret wedding. I think that would become the main focus of the film. If you were to do this story today, that would be the hook. Obviously, they could remake the film and set it in the late 60s or 70s. But if they were remaking it and setting it in today, I think you know, it would solely focus on the fact that they decided to go on this French vacation together, and somehow the press believes they're married. And do they keep up that charade, or do they tell everyone, and does everyone believe them? And obviously social media would play a huge part in this. You know, I thought that was so funny that, you know, all the papers are saying they're married, and they have no idea because they're just, you know, on vacation in France, and no one knows how to get a hold of them, and, you know, they don't have a cell phone or anything like that. So I think that would be a major component there as well. And I'm also would be intrigued to see how sexually progressive the film would be if someone tried to make it today, because there's a lot of elements of this film that I'm like, that was very much a period of like the late 60s, early 70s of like flower power, like love is love kind of stuff. So yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts there?
Well, yeah. So this is mid 60s, right? So it premiered on stage in 66. So this is like, you know, much different time. I think a lot would have to change about the new version. I think if it was going to be a man at the beginning, I don't think we could really have him just betting all these women at the beginning and then still have the audience want to follow him along. I mean, unless it was like, you know, just like the most charismatic star. If it was like Chris Evans,
I think you would get Ryan Reynolds to do it, and he could get away with it.
Okay.
You'd have him. He would be very Van Wilder, which is not a movie that you could make now. But he'd be very just like, and I don't think we'd see him. It'd
be like Aftermath.
We'd see like Aftermaths, or like him kicking one girl out and like the other one coming around the corner. Like I think they'd find ways to do it that would still make him like charming and less like he seemed to prey on these women in this film, and I think
that element would be erased. I think there'd be more conflict earlier in the movie. I think the celebrity aspect of his job would be more played up. Obviously social media would play a role if it were set today, and I think the title would be different.
Yeah.
I think it'd just be called Soup. No, I don't know what
honestly, that's exactly what jumped to my mind, because they want to play on it but not a lot. Yeah, Soup.
Yeah, and I mean, sure, they would get a great younger actress to play the Goldie Hawn character. You know, and I think they would make her even more three-dimensional, and I think like their relationship would be played up more, and there would just be, I think, a little bit more, as I said before, like a little bit more urgency and stakes like throughout the movie rather than just in the last 10, 15 minutes. But yeah, I mean,
now that I said Ryan Reynolds came out of nowhere, but now I feel like he 100% could play that character. And who do we around that age?
Yeah, who would play her? I'm trying to think who's like in her early 20s, mid 20s, who could maybe pull off that role. We might not have to sit on it. You would. I feel like you're more familiar with for your job, like of the younger actresses.
I would. The funny thing is that I think part of the magic of knowing where Goldie was in her career at this point is kind of pulling someone that hasn't done a ton. But I honestly, like, it's not something that I feel like she's really done at all in her career. But like something about the confidence of a Haley Steinfeld, I feel like if she could, like, I feel like she actually could make like a good partner to him there.
I haven't seen her in a while. What was her last film? I
Yeah,
loved The Edge of 17. That was 2016.
yeah.
Pitch
She's
Perfect
in Pitch
sequel she's
Perfect.
in.
Yeah.
Yeah, she could be
Those
good.
also comes to mind. But yeah, I feel like she exudes that kind of
Yeah.
confidence that could be useful there. But you almost need like a young, Reese Witherspoon
Mm,
kind of person too. So I'd
yeah.
have to spend some time thinking about it. I feel like there's like someone that does TV that would be.
Yeah.
I mean,
Is Reese's
I feel like
daughter
there's.
is Reese's daughter acting yet? She should.
I mean,
She's
she should
gorgeous.
be.
Yeah. So casting directors, if you're listening,
There you
we,
go.
we,
There you go.
we have our remake of There's a Girl in My Soup with Ryan Reynolds and Haley Steinfeld ready to go. Just have to make some tweaks to the old script.
Yeah, and a little less back hair.
Yeah, a little less back hair, exactly. Anything else you wanted to mention about this movie? Any other scenes we didn't touch on? Anything else you wanted to say about There's a Girl in My Soup before we move to our final two segments?
Yeah, I mean, again, I would just say like, I think ultimately it's worth checking out. For as many times as we've kind of been like, oh, I don't know, like it's definitely worth checking out. And unexpected is the word that I would use for the ending as well. Is all I'll say about that. I think have me back for another podcast where all you talk about is the endings of films, and we can really dive into the ending here and what it means for the film as a whole. It's you will walk away with thoughts is what I would say if you're wondering whether or not you should watch this film.
Yeah. No, I think it's definitely worth a watch. If you're, a fan of Sellers or Goldie Hawn, like you definitely need to take a look at this one. And I didn't love the movie, but I'd give it like a 7 out of 10. I enjoyed it. It's a pleasant way to spend 90 minutes. I mean, really, you can't go wrong with these two in a film. Like,
100%.
And that it's not just their typical kind of characters we've seen in some of their other work. I think it's definitely worth a look. Not as well known as most of her other films, but I would recommend it for people looking for kind of unique, a little bit eccentric early 70s romantic comedy. This one might be worth your time. Yeah. All right, so that takes us to our final two segments. The first one is called the Divine Double Feature. This is where we pick a more contemporary film that has either like a similar storyline or similar genre, but doesn't have to be super similar. Just like, what if this There's a Girl in My Soup is only 90 minutes, so we would have time to look at a second film. What would be kind of like an interesting second film, more contemporary, that would kind of like show, at least to some extent, like the evolution of cinema over the last few decades? What would be your second pick for a movie to follow There's a Girl in My Soup?
Yeah, I mean, because this film is so unique in the way that it treats sex, in the way that it kind of treats the male-female dynamic. It's hard to find one that fits. It's like a perfect fit, particularly within the last 20 years. But I think we go back to the Pygmalion story, and so there's moments of this that remind me of Pretty Woman, which obviously is not the last 20 years, but that kind of So then I started thinking, okay, well, what are more modern tellings that aren't she's all that of that similar storyline? And I think ultimately you're looking for a romantic comedy that stars just an incredibly charismatic young female lead. And so I think you're looking at stuff with Sandra Bullock, you're looking at stuff with Julia Roberts. Like there's a Notting Hill aspect to like the celebrity and non-celebrity.
They would love, by the way, they would love that you just called them young.
Yes, sure, I'll give it to them. But I mean, but the crazy thing is when she did Notting Hill, like she was, I think, maybe in her early 30s.
Yes, we share a birthday. October 28th. Julia Roberts was born 1967.
Okay,
so she was like 31 when she shot
31
Notting
because
Hill.
I always forget how young she was, like 19 or something when she filmed Pretty Woman. So like you're looking for someone with that kind of energy. I think of like when we first saw Cameron Diaz on camera.
Yeah, like, The Mask.
That kind of, and I think Cameron Diaz actually, if Cameron Diaz was, mask age again, would actually be a fantastic fit for this film. Like her energy as being like somebody that could play romantic and powerful, but also really funny is there.
I miss Cameron Diaz. Can you help get her out of retirement with the wine? I know she's got the wine venture. Like, let's put her back on the screen. She's great. I love Cameron Diaz.
She's so fantastic, and I think similar to Goldie. Goldie decided at a certain
Yeah.
point she was like, I'm not going to do stuff except for when my
Yeah.
husband needs me to play his wife, Mrs. Claus.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, I would love to see Cameron pop back in and do something really fantastic.
And
I
Snatched.
agree. Oh, there you go. Yes. Can't forget that one.
Yeah.
But I think, you're looking at like those Sandra Bullock, so I would choose like a Cameron Diaz, Sandra Bullock, Julia Roberts, like rom-com from
Okay.
like the early to mid 2000s.
Oh,
like,
yeah. No, that's
like
similar to my
something
thinking
around
too.
there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. What was yours?
No, but yeah, my pick. So I was like, okay, this is a movie about an older man and a younger woman. Let's make the second film an older woman and a younger man. So I went with The Proposal with Sandra Bullock and
Yes.
Ryan Reynolds, which
Yes,
I
that actually,
love.
I almost went with that. If I had to choose one, that was one of the ones that I was narrowing it down to. So, like mine.
The Proposal is, so I'm a huge Sandra Bullock fan. I saw that opening night, really enjoyed it, but I was like, it's kind of a throwaway movie. It's not, but it's one of those that just like when it's on TV and I turn on and it's playing, I'll watch the rest of it. Like,
Pretty
it's
much
just a great.
with
It's
Sandra Bullock from that era. I will.
Yeah.
It's one of those things I might not seek it out, but I will watch every minute of it. Although I do own the net on DVD.
Yes.
and
I love the net.
Like the DVD menu for that film is incredible. Like I love it.
Yeah. 2009 was a crazy year for Sandra Bullock. She was in 3 films. The first one that came out was The Proposal, which I love. And then the second film was All About Steve, which she won the Razzie Award for Worst Actress of the Year. And then her third film was The Blind Side, which won her the Academy Award for Best Actress of the Year. That was a crazy year for Sandra Bullock fans, if I have to say. That was
The roller
great.
coaster.
A roller coaster of like this. I mean, All About Steve is rough. And then, but in between, she's got these 2 great films that I still enjoy to this day. So, I just thought, like, I was thinking, like, what's a romantic comedy of like the last 15 years that I really like that maybe, shifts the gender dynamics a little bit. So that's an older woman, younger man. And they have great chemistry in The Proposal.
And Ryan Reynolds.
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds again. And there's been talk of them reuniting for a film for many years. And I want to say,
I know they got along really, really well.
Yeah.
And so I'm sure they would love to work together.
Yeah,
again.
she showed up to one of his movie premieres, like a film she wasn't in. I want to say it was the Change Up or one of those. Like she just showed up and just to support him. So I think they have a friendship off screen, and hoping that they.
I would love if they
have
found a
another
way
film.
to put her into Deadpool. Like I think her energy would be really fun.
Yeah.
There.
My favorite pairing of Sandra Bullock has always been Keanu Reeves, and I was very excited when they came back for The Lake House, even though they have like 10 minutes together in that movie, very little time. I'm like still rooting for will Keanu and Sandra do another one together? Probably not Speed 3. But you never know, Patrick. Crazier things have happened.
You never know.
All right, so our final segment today is called Beyond the Flick, and that's where we pick a figure from the film and talk about their career a little bit more in depth. And this is both Peter Sellers and Goldie Hawn's films, but I'm going to get into Peter Sellers, I'm sure, in the coming years, especially with his Pink Panther movie. So I want to talk about Goldie Hawn today. I know you're a big fan. I want to say you said something like, whenever you can quote from the First Wives Club on a podcast, you'll take it.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So let's talk about Goldie.
Club.
What do we love? First, just like, what do we love about Goldie Hawn and, in her many films? Like what is it about her that makes, the movies she appears in always better than they would be without her?
She plays a fish out of water almost better than anyone. And I think it's because she's so conventionally Hollywood gorgeous.
Still today.
And yet is not afraid to be just completely silly,
goofy,
and actually be a fantastic physical comedian,
mm-hmm.
and yet also a very great actress. So she hits all these things that normally, if you saw Goldie Hawn, you'd be like, oh, okay, someone cast her because she's just like the most gorgeous thing to walk into this room ever. But she continues to surprise you, and I think that worked for her. That worked for her in Private Benjamin. That worked for her in Overboard. That works for her in Death Becomes Her, when obviously she plays very different at the beginning of that film.
So good.
She plays just someone that can enter into a situation and completely surprise you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's something that, and to get back to her, in the word of that one critic, overly expressive eyes, like she just tells you a whole story in a look, in a fantastically gorgeous look. And so, yeah, for me, it's funny because like Private Benjamin and Overboard are such great films for kids, I think, just because you get into the broad comedy aspect of a lot of them. But watching them as an adult, you see like what great transformation stories those are, and empowerment stories some of her stuff is. But yes, First Wives Club is in my top 5 favorite films of all time. Whenever anyone asks
Of all
me,
time?
yeah, whenever anyone asks me
Wow.
my top 5, they haven't changed since like maybe high school, and I stick with them, and they're very like crowd pleaser, or maybe, I mean, obviously First Wives Club, either you're a massive fan or you've never heard of it, and that's one thing, and some of my others, but like I there are other films that I think are better films, but if you ask me my favorite
that
films
you like to watch,
that I like to watch, like First Wives Club, I've probably seen 600 times at least.
Wow.
Drop Dead Gorgeous is another one. Like
Yes.
and could quote the entire thing from beginning to end.
The
I'd love
the
to
last great Kirstie Alley performance.
yes,
Drop Dead Gorgeous.
I would love to turn that into a musical one day. Noises Off is another one that like either you've heard of or not, but another play that was turned into a film. But yeah, I love those kind of things. So I love First Wives Club. I think it's so funny. Their dynamic is fantastic. In fact, one time I was leaving a hotel in LA in the middle of the day, like had done an interview or something. And it was Goldie Hawn, Bette Midler, and Diane Keaton had just gotten lunch together, and they were waiting for their cars at the valet. And I just was like freaking out because I was like, oh my God, it's all of them. And they have to be talking about reuniting. And yeah, I'm still fingers crossed.
Yeah, there's been talk of a new film reuniting
but there's
them.
been talk for like a decade now. So I'm fingers crossed, but like I'll be pleasantly surprised if it actually happens. I also love Everyone Says I Love You, which is her Woody Allen musical film.
That is on my list. I love Everyone Says I Love You, and it's a film I feel like even fans of Woody Allen's work are not that familiar with. Kind of came and went in '96. It's I saw it in the theater with my mom, and I loved that movie. It's his only musical, and she's great in it. She's got pretty big chunk of scenes in the film, and her last scene with him on the River Seine in Paris is gorgeous. There's some great stuff in that movie.
I love that movie. And then the one that I was going to bring up that is like by no means a critical darling, but that I just thought was funny and really lets her play into the physical comedy and with someone that is of similar temperament is The Out of Towners.
With Steve Martin. Yeah,
with Steve Martin. They play a married couple that isn't necessarily getting along as much anymore, and they travel to New York. And it's a little bit like Date Night, that Tina Fey Steve Carell movie, in the sense that like they just end up in these more outlandish situations. And I always remember there's a scene where they end up starting to make love, as they might say, in the middle of a park, in Central Park maybe, and she's running and she just goes, "I've got grass in my ass." And like when that movie came out, I was like maybe the perfect age for like that just to me the funniest line ever, and so I still remember that moment. I love that. In fact, I recently moved, and I had a bunch of VHS tapes that my husband finally made me just get rid of, and Out of Towners actually was one of them.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, Out of Towners is fun. I feel like that got just destroyed critically, but if you're 100%. A fan of those two together, like I think House Sitter is the stronger film. Like if you were to watch one of the 100%, two, but House Sitter is great.
Oh yeah, great. So definitely check that one out. But Out of Towners, I just got to share my love.
But Out of Towners is also a lot of fun, and just their chemistry together. I mean, they could have done another 3 films together, and I would have been happy for it. I mean, they're great together. Pretty much anything with Steve Martin, I'm a fan of. So yeah, I'm in agreement with you on those choices. My third favorite is actually Everyone Says I Love You. I was kind of just shocked. I thought, oh, he won't know this one.
Oh yeah, no, I love that film. Well, I also love music. I grew up doing musical theater and stuff like that, so I think there was that drew it to me, and then also not knowing Goldie Hawn's country music career, like was also very impressed with her singing. Like everyone in there, I was like, oh wow, like they're all so great. So it was really fun.
And then my second, you're going to be mad at me. My first is not the First Wives Club. My second favorite is the First Wives Club, which I remember seeing like opening day in the theater with my mom. And I remember asking her after it was over, can I go see it again? You think she would have known about me back in 96? My son wants to go see The First Wives Club a second time. But that's such a great movie. Again, one of those where it's on, I'll just watch the rest of it. Such a great cast in that movie beyond the main three, right? I mean, gosh, who is in that movie? We have so many great people.
Well, we always
Maggie Smith.
Exactly, Maggie
and
Smith,
Sarah Jessica Parker.
Marcia Gay Harden.
It's hilarious as the
Jesse
therapist.
Spano, whatever. Naomi from Showgirls. What's her name?
Elizabeth Berkley.
We always joke, my friend John and I always joke that they should do a Lifetime movie that's the second Wives Club, because you have Marcia Gay Harden, Sarah Jessica Parker, and Elizabeth Berkley as always, as like the second, as the women their husbands move on to from them too. And would love to see like that version of the movie.
I think it was Diane Keaton who was like really pushing for a sequel in the late 90s, early 2000s, and then would love it. They just never did it. I feel like it's like if the movie were to feature the three of them now, I don't know if that would be like, would you like to see a First Wives Club sequel today? Like, of the three of them, would that work?
Yeah, because it's not like they'd be like empty nesters or anything like that, because like their kids in the movie, one was already like past college age, I think, and the other was like having his bar mitzvah actually, so 13. So they would have already gone through that stage of their life. It would be interesting to see where they would pick up with their stories.
So of the three leads of the First Wives Club, I've never seen or met Bette Midler, although I did really want to see Hello Dolly. I was there when she was doing it, and I saw a couple other things. I went to this like award ceremony for Loyola Marymount University where I was a student, and they were honoring Kurt Russell for something, and Goldie Hawn was in the audience, and she was like 6-7 rows behind me, and I was like, oh my god, I didn't even care about Kurt. I was like, oh, Kurt Russell, oh my god, Goldie Hawn. And I tried to go say something to her, but they like left and I didn't get a chance. The only one I met Diane Keaton. She came to Reno in 2017 to promote her wine, the Keaton. I don't know if you know, she has like a wine. And so you could
do a whole episode on Godfather connections, because you have the Coppola wine, you have the Diane Keaton wine. Like, let's just see who else has got some.
Yeah, exactly. But so when I had the chance to talk to Diane Keaton for a minute or whatever, I had to say hi to her. I gushed about the First Wives Club, and I gushed about Father of the Bride.
Good choices.
Two of my favorites of hers. Yeah. So First Wives Club is fantastic. Definitely one of my favorite Goldie Hawns. A few of my runners up would be Cactus Flower. If you haven't seen it, it's worth a look. It's her debut is really fun. She hasn't really she never made a great dramatic film, right? Like a really serious film. She did a few, like Deceived from 1991, kind of a thriller with John Hurd, which has its moments. I've been kind of a Goldie Hawn completist, so I've been trying to like seek out some of the other ones she did. She did this really obscure movie in 1992. The same summer, she did 3 films. Summer of 92, she was in House Sitter, she was in Death Becomes Her, and she did a film called Crisscross, where she plays like a stripper. They played it on Turner Classic Movies, did a day of Goldie Hawn in August, and they played Crisscross. It's not available anywhere. So I was like, oh my gosh, they're playing it. And it's not good.
Okay. Well, maybe I won't check it out then.
It's not good. It's not good. The lead of the film is this young boy, and his acting just is very stiff, and that kind of takes the movie down. But it's kind of interesting to see her in like this very serious dramatic role as a stripper. That was kind of interesting about it. And then she takes a 4-year gap, right, between those 3 films. I think she took time off to take care. I think she took time to take care of her ailing mom or something. And then she came back with First Wives Club and Everyone Says I Love You in 96. And then she just is in a few scattered films after that. I think her best dramatic role is in the Sugarland Express, the first theatrical feature film directed by Steven Spielberg. Have you seen that film or heard of it?
I have. Yeah, it's again, like, it's hard to deny her talent.
Yeah.
Like, it's so evident in everything that she does, even the ones that are not fantastic films.
Yeah. And we can't ignore Private Benjamin either. That's the one she got her only nomination for leading actress at the Academy Awards. It might be if if somebody had no idea who Goldie Hawn was and wanted to just get a sense of who she was as a performer, the kind of stories that she liked telling. I believe that was her first film as the producer as well. She got involved in producing in the 80s, kind of taking charge of her career as very few actors at the time were. I feel like Private Benjamin would be a really good one to show somebody who didn't know who she was and wanted to get a taste
100%.
of her work. She's great. I taught that in a film class a few years ago, Private Benjamin. None of the students had seen it, and they all loved it. It's a really great film. It holds up. It's 40 years old, but still works great today. So I would highly recommend Private Benjamin if you haven't seen it. It's a great Goldie Hawn movie. But my favorite, Patrick, and this comes from childhood. This was one of two films for a couple of years when I was 8, 9, 10 years old. I would just play on a loop. Back when we had the VHS, you have to wait as it rewound.
Be kind, rewind.
The first was Sister Act with Whoopi Goldberg, which I just heard they announced they're going to do Sister Act 3 for Disney Plus, which I'm excited about. See what that's all about. Death Becomes Her is my favorite Goldie Hawn movie. Death Becomes Her is
that or Overboard, but yeah.
No, I love Overboard too. That's a great one. But I feel like Overboard just a few years before my time. That film came out when I was 3, so I wouldn't have seen it. Like I saw Death Becomes Her in a theater, and that came out in July of 92. So I would have been 7. My parents took me to see Death Becomes Her. I was 7. That's crazy to me. I still remember sitting in the theater watching that film and absolutely falling in love with it. Even though at 7, 8, 9 years old, I probably had really not a whole lot of clue what's going on here. I just feel like that film, it's kind of a unique film in the careers of all of the main 3 actors, right? Bruce Willis really, he's done a lot of comedies throughout his career, but that is a character we've never really seen from him before or since. He really changes his look.
He was such like a sex, like he turned himself into like the sex symbol movie star.
Yeah, Die Hard.
Almost. They didn't want to give him Die Hard because he was TV.
Yeah, moonlighting.
Yeah, and had. I always, when I ever rewatch that film, I'm always just like shocked he signed on to do that role because they make him look so gross and like against type. And kudos to him for being like, I want to do that.
He looks so unattractive, and he's like a drunk, so he's like pale, and it's like, it was such a like unique choice for him to take on that role at that time in his career. This was right after Die Hard 2, so he's like a big action movie star, and for him to do a role like that, kind of intriguing. I guess it was originally meant for Kevin Kline, but something happened and Kevin Kline fell through. I can totally see Kline in that too.
Love Kevin Kline, but like glad that we got to see Bruce Willis do it.
And then Meryl Streep, as we've talked about, the 80s was kind of her, like every film she did, she had a new accent. She did this, she did that, mostly dramas. And then Meryl Streep had this kind of strange 4 years where she did only comedies. She did She-Devil, Postcard from the Edge, Defending Your Life, and Death Becomes Her. And as much as I adore Meryl Streep, of course, as a dramatic actress, I also really love her in comedy, and she is hilarious in Death Becomes Her, which she kind of resurrected aspects of that character of Madeline Ashton in The Prom, right? Yeah, that Broadway diva. Like there was a little bit of Madeline in The Prom, and I enjoyed that about it too. And then Goldie Hawn. She did a lot of comedy. She didn't do a whole lot of like really dark black comedy. She didn't do a whole lot of like special effects movies, especially at that time. So this was kind of an anomaly in her career too. And gosh, her scenes in it are very funny. Her scene where she's really overweight, right, at the beginning is great, and her just like sitting like at the, when they're trying to check on her and seeing if she's getting any better, and she's clearly not. She's still obsessed with Madeline, watching her show just over and over on the TV. And then her transformation's great. And then when she gets, blown out of the house with the shotgun and she's got a giant hole in her stomach, that whole sequence is great. And
I had a friend who did that as a Halloween costume, and he's very tech savvy and actually had set up like screens so that you could see through him, which was incredible. It was incredible.
That shot where she sits down and then like what is it? The shovel or whatever is like going through her stomach, and she's just very like nonchalant, very casual. It's a special film. It's this weird film in Robert Zemeckis' career as a director. Right, like after Back to the Future 2 and 3. And then goes into Forrest Gump, where he wins an Academy Award. And then right in the middle, there's Death Becomes Her, this kind of oddball black comedy. which I still to this day adore. I got the Blu-ray Scream Factory edition a couple years ago and watched it again. It had been a while since I'd looked at it from beginning to end, but I still love it, and probably my favorite Goldie Hawn movie.
Good choice. Good choice.
So that about takes us to the end here, Patrick. I wanted to end by just thanking you so much for doing this for me. This was a blast. I really wanted to find, a Goldie Hawn fan to talk about. There's a girl in my soup today, and this went above and beyond, Patrick. This was an absolute thrill. So thank you for being here.
I loved it. Anytime you want to chat film, both in public or in private, I'm game. I'm game.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you want to just leave our listeners with where they can find you online, where any social media handles, like where can our listeners find you if they want to check out some more of your work?
Sure. You can find me on social media at Patrick Gomez LA, as in Los Angeles. So I can never move is what I like to say. Patrick Gomez LA, and obviously at theavclub.com, and on the AV Club social media as well. But no, thank you so much for having me. This was a blast.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you all for listening. So if you want to check out more of Film at 50, go to filmat50.com. You can check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Also, check out the Patreon page. At least 2 new episodes a month. So check that out and support the podcast. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.